It's so good to be here with everyone this evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in tonight. I'm going to share my screen now, and we will have a kind of overview of both the physical aspects and the mystical aspects of breathing, with a particular emphasis on conscious breathing. But we're also going to learn a lot this evening. My slides are really packed with information, and I hope you will find them as fascinating as I have in researching them for you. So I've called this the Rosicrucian art of conscious breathing, but we'll also talk about the automatic ways in which we breathe. So here's a brief overview of the agenda for tonight. After a quick introduction, we will go straight to the science of breathing, then to the mysticism, and at the end, we'll have a summary of takeaways, and then we'll end with a Rosicrucian breathing exercise. Breathing is an automatic function to which we give very little thought. However, breathing is also one of those bodily functions over which we have some conscious control. Understanding the science and mystical aspects of breath helps us to experience radiant health. And the Grand Master has done several teleconferences on this subject. There's also an entire Rosicrucian digest dedicated to the idea of radiant health, which also contains exercises for you to try. Understanding the mystical and the science, mystical aspects and science of breath aids in healing. It offers us a longer life while allowing us to be more effective on this plane of understanding as we all evolve in awareness. Achieving the optimum functioning of the body, mind, and soul is a traditional Rosicrucian ideal. So I'm wondering if you might, as Rosicrucian students, those of you who are on the call, will remember the first point or suggestion of the Rosicrucian Code of Life. If you don't, here it is. In the morning before rising, thank the God of your heart, the divine, for the new day that you are privileged to live on the earthly plane, and ask the divine to inspire you throughout the day. Then stand facing east. Take 7 deep breaths as you focus on the vitality that is awakening in you. Afterwards, drink a glass of water and then begin your daily activities. And as you proceed through the monographs, many members also learn by heart this special invocation. God of my heart, God of my realization, thank you for the return of consciousness and the privilege of serving one more day in the fulfillment of thy decrees, and for the continued evolution of my soul personality upon this plane of understanding. Keep me constantly attuned with thy mind, that I might be more readily inspired. So mote it be. Now, this first point in the Rosicrucian Code of Life, and later when we post the resources, you will see how to link to that Code of Life. But the first point also suggests that you take 7 deep breaths. Taking in fresh air is vital to the metabolism of the body. The Rosicrucian suggests that inhaling through the nose at an open window, if possible, is optimum for creating vitality, purifying the body mind, and raising our consciousness. Now, mind you, if you live in the city and you're very close to traffic or to a highway with heavy trucks, you might not want to open your window, but rather rely on the air filtration system within your apartment or your home. But this is ideal, especially if you're able to open the window, as in this illustration, to nature. Physically, a balanced exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is essential for the metabolism of each cell. Now think of this exchange like a dance. like partners changing hands in a square dance, for instance. Carbon dioxide must be expelled. Hence, take 7 deep breaths slowly by fully exhaling and then slowly and fully inhaling to create the optimum effect. And Rosicrucians call this neutral breathing. That is neither holding on full nor on empty. So let us turn to the science of breathing and the body. A good question that many of you might be considering is what is in the air that we breathe? Now, some people assume that it's all oxygen, but as you can see from this chart from the Smithsonian Institute, that it's only 21%. Oxygen is just 21% of these various gases. Nitrogen makes up the largest component of 78%. And in smaller amounts, actually 1%, we have water vapor, carbon dioxide, and various other gases, which are listed here, hydrogen, helium, even greenhouse gases, etc. Aerosols like smoke, and this is a concern now with global warming, and especially with forest fires, these kinds of aerosols and bioaerosols, which are living microorganisms, also travel through the air by wind, rain, and even exhaled breath. That's one of the reasons that surgeons, for instance, and any of the medical staff assisting with surgery wear masks. Similarly, human blood is more than just oxygen and carbon dioxide. So in speaking of blood, we can talk about various components. These include cells, proteins, and sugars. Plasma is about 60% of blood, while blood also contains white cells, which are important to your immune function, platelets, which help with clotting, and red cells, which help with the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Any liquids that you ingest are also absorbed by the body, and if there are toxins, especially in those liquids, these are carried by blood and by lymph, which is part of the immune system. Lymph also contains white blood cells, and these are then excreted. This is something I would like to call the cardiopulmonary matrix, matrix being a kind of central point in the body. I know the brain is probably just as important as the heart, but all of these various parts of the body function in tandem. Now, in this illustration, you see the various chambers of the heart and where things lead. In the blue, you see deoxygenated blood and where it goes, and also oxygenated blood in red coming out of the aorta up here. What's interesting about this diagram is that it's a really good illustration of heart valves. I myself have a heart murmur. I was born with a murmur. What that means, of course, is that I have one or more valves that tend to be a little bit floppy and leaky. And this is what we call a kind of a congenital defect. I was born with this. So what the valves do is they make sure that the blood keeps traveling in this particular direction. I'm going to show you the circulatory system in just a moment. Here we see, though, how the heart and lungs function together. See here the 4 chambers of the heart and how oxygenated blood from the lungs up here travel around from each lung, right and the left, into the heart. And the deoxygenated blood goes from the heart back to the lungs, where we have that kind of gaseous exchange, carbon dioxide and oxygen. And this is a system that works completely in harmony. Now, of course, the heart is not separate from the lungs as it appears to be in this diagram. This is, after all, just an illustration. The heart, you must picture it as being between the lungs and slightly to the left. And I just found out that the left lung is slightly smaller, though not much, to allow room for the heart. So when someone asks you, either in ritual or in a court of law, to place your hand over your heart, you will not be placing it way over on the left below your breastbone. Instead, you will be placing your hand at the center. This is the heart center, psychically speaking, but also physically. The heart is actually between both lungs and tilted slightly toward the left. Oxygen status in the body changes twice, in the lungs and in the organs and tissues of the body via the pulmonary and systemic loops. And they are literally like a loop. And we say circulation because blood, in essence, travels around the body in a kind of circular motion. So if we start here at the bottom of the illustration, and this is from the University of Guelph in Canada, by the way, which is also known for its veterinary sciences. So here we have oxygen exchanging hands, so to speak, with carbon dioxide. And you see here, as the arrows show us, going up the vena cava into the right side of the heart, up into the lungs, making the exchange with oxygen again, and then traveling down to the left side, up and over, and again to the tissues of the body. And follow this loop. It's really quite fascinating how the body works so harmoniously, so beautifully. Now, your heart may beat up to, I think, 100,000 times a day. That's day and night, although you breathe perhaps maybe 20,000 times in and out. It's a really fascinating process, and I behoove you to learn more about it, because certainly something that Rosicrucian students like to do is learn about natural laws. They are scientifically inclined. And if you recall, in the past, it was Rosicrucians who also founded the Royal Society in England, which is very much focused on exploration and science. Here we have another illustration of the heart. Your heart also needs oxygen in order to perform at an optimum level. It is a muscle, and it has two coronary arteries, the right and the left. And you see them here highlighted in these boxes, the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. Notice how large the aorta seems in relation to how tiny and narrow these coronary arteries are. These arteries on the outside of the heart supply the muscle with oxygen, and because they're coming directly from the aorta, we find that the blood here is quite saturated. It's rich in oxygen. The heart, therefore, is also quite vulnerable if oxygen is starved. So if there's a blockage in one or more of these coronary arteries, you are in trouble. The heart will, perhaps you might have an infarction, as it's called, or even cardiac arrest. My mom, who lived to be 96 years old, actually had 2 small heart attacks, which damaged some of her heart muscle tissue, but she survived both of those instances. So contrary to what most people believe, veins also contain oxygen, though in lesser amount than arteries. The lungs not only function in terms of gaseous exchange, but also clean the blood of impurities and certain toxins, mostly in gaseous form. For example, that's why breathalyzers work so well. The technology exists that can actually measure a person's alcohol consumption at the roadside. The kidneys perform a further function in harmony with the heart and lungs to filter out elements from the blood that are then excreted. All of these functions are primarily automatic. That is, you don't need to think about them for them to work. They work whether we know about them or not. Now, your brain also needs oxygen. According to the American National Institute of Health, quoting a 2011 paper on stroke, the brain depends on continuous blood flow to deliver oxygen and nutrients. And some of these nutrients include glucose, various sugars, vitamins, and to remove carbon dioxide and cellular waste. When cerebral blood flow is obstructed and brain tissue is no longer able to sustain homeostatic function, that means a balanced kind of metabolic function, the terminal result is energetic failure and cell death. Now, what's highlighted here in the illustration is an actual human MRI from the University of Oxford. So this is the human brain showing an area that is found to be unique in humans, and it's highlighted here in red. This area is particularly vulnerable to lack of oxygen. It's called the ventrolateral frontal cortex. The green shows an area common to humans and other primates. So the higher monkeys, apes. The unique area in red is important for humans because it allows us to multitask. I know some of you think you can't multitask, but apparently you are able to do that. In fact, some of you might be reading your email right now while you're also listening to this presentation. So it's your frontal lobes that are working on that. It also processes language and higher level cognitive functions, decision making. And some of these have to do with perhaps buying property and whether or not you should renew your mortgage, etc. It can be affected by stroke, drug addiction, and neurodegenerative diseases. It is implicated in ADHD and other learning disabilities, as well as compulsive behavior disorders, especially if there's damage there in illnesses such as Pick's disease. However, the brain is the mechanism through which the self functions. It is far more complex and it is alive compared to a computer. Although we often use that analogy, we sometimes use the analogy of the brain being like a radio. It is a kind of receiver. It steps down higher energies or signals so that you as a soul personality can function. The real question is, where is the master controller? According to Wilder Penfield, the Canadian neurosurgeon who mapped the primary cortex, the sensory motor cortex in the brain, he said, although he can find how someone can raise his or her arm, stimulate a certain part of the brain, and have the memory or the aroma of burnt toast, even the visual imagery of seeing yourself in your kitchen in the past when you burned the toast. However, as Wilder Penfield said, he could never find the one who is raising the arm. Where is the master controller? And that's a very important question. Here's a short form that is a relatively recent, I would say, discovery, HIF. The H stands for hypoxia. Hypoxia refers to reduced oxygen, anoxia to lack of oxygen. The Nobel Prize in Medicine was won in 2019 by 3 researchers for their discoveries of how cells sense and adapt to oxygen availability. Proteins called hypoxia-inducible factors, or HIFs, are activated to conserve oxygen. They're considered the first responders when cells experience hypoxia, or a sudden lack of oxygen, but HIFs ultimately have a damaging effect. This was also a discovery that was made. This mechanism is now under study, and various other aspects of it are under study to create therapeutics that will assist a second response specific to certain tissues to keep cells alive. And that's from a 2020 medical news announcement under the heading "Why Low Oxygen Damages the Brain." There you see a representation of the Nobel Prize. You also, I'm directing you to our Rose Claw Journal. It has its own website, www.roseclawjournal.org. We do have the little kind of cross or plus sign between rose and claw in the title of the journal. However, the website eliminates that, roseclawjournal, one word, .org. And please see Dr. Brian Young's paper, The Brain Mind as a Network Entity, a medical case study in consciousness, where he looks at a particular patient who experienced coma after cardiac arrest and then over time is able to regain his mental faculties and even return to work. And it's a really interesting article because it is transdisciplinary in its examination of that case. Now, another question arises, what controls breathing? It seems that breathing is sometimes an involuntary function. Often it is under our own control. Well, there are various areas in the brain that are responsible. The primary motor cortex for voluntary functions. That's the higher aspect of the brain. It kind of works as a band across the top of the brain. And for involuntary breathing, the brainstem, the pons, the medulla, and the autonomic nervous system. Now, this illustration, The Mermaid by John William Waterhouse from 1900, is really to illustrate Undine's curse. This is an actual medical condition that refers to a misfunctioning or malfunctioning of the medulla, in particular, part of the lower brain, that can arrest automatic breathing. That is, the body, because the medulla is damaged in some way, cannot automatically breathe. And I want to reassure you that this is a very, very rare condition. The name Undine's Curse comes from a Germanic myth of Undine or Ondine, and it's based on Greek mythology, but they've updated it slightly during the Middle Ages, that she cursed her faithless lover. He was a knight, not faithful to her, and her curse made him lose all automatic bodily functions. He had to control his breathing consciously. Well, of course, he eventually became exhausted, fell asleep, and died. Now, why should you breathe through your nose? I have a list here of the many advantages of nose breathing, and you can find these, it's ubiquitous on the internet. So if you just Google that, you'll find many advantages to nose breathing over mouth breathing. Of course, we breathe through our mouths while we're speaking, but normally when we're not talking or singing or intoning vowel sounds, chanting, whatever, you are breathing hopefully through your nose. First of all, because it creates optimum oxygen absorption. The nose moistens and prepares air for better gaseous exchange in the lungs. The nose has better filtration that reduces the risk of respiratory infections. In a way, you could talk about the nose as a kind of first responder. The nose also, or breathing through the nose, enhances nitric oxide production, which widens blood vessels for better circulation and blood pressure. Nose breathing sharpens memory and cognitive function. The tongue, when you're breathing through your nose, if you just demonstrate this, just by breathing through your nose right now, your tongue should be touching the top of your mouth, the roof of your mouth, which is the best posture for your teeth, your chin, your jaw, and an open airway. Better sleep if you nose breathe. So some people will sleep better on their side, one side or the other side. And if you have a better sleep, of course, you have a more vibrant daytime life. Your nose is very closely associated with your sense of smell. In fact, that's how you taste things as well. The nose is a receptor for taste, which encourages better nutrition. Your sense of smell, it's also capable of helping you to sense any kind of harm that might befall you. You're about to step into an elevator and there's a person stepping in there, and you suddenly intuitively know perhaps you should not step into the elevator with that person. There is a way in which our intuitive senses are also heightened through our physical senses. Recently, it's been discovered that your nose, your sense of smell, can also assist you in navigation. So nose breathers have a better sense of direction, let's say when exiting a building, for instance, knowing whether to turn to the right or the left. Some of the disadvantages of mouth breathing include opening us up to infection and allergens, creating snoring, which causes sleep disruption for the person who is snoring and also the partner who might be sleeping beside that person, increased apnea, that is lack of oxygen, while increasing daytime fatigue, depression, and cognitive issues, which include worsening memory. Mouth breathing has serious impacts on cardiovascular health, especially atrial fibrillation and irregular heartbeats, as well as contributing to high blood pressure. Mouth breathing affects facial structure and restricts the airway further. The jaw drops, hence the throat closes, and the teeth also misalign, which can be a problem in young children when their teeth are just developing, but it can affect adults as well. Of course, mouth breathing increases nasal secretion and also blockage. And finally, because you're exhaling more moisture, leads to rapid dehydration. Should you be breathing more, that is, more rapidly, more often, more than 20,000 times a day? Well, how can you increase oxygen to your brain? The answer might surprise you. Relax and breathe normally through your nose. It helps to take short walks or breaks. Don't sit too long at a computer. So I'll try not to keep you too long this evening. Take short walks in fresh air. Be more conscious of how you are breathing and keep your mouth closed. Overbreathing isn't healthy either. Hyperventilation happens when we breathe too rapidly, increasing blood alkalinity that constricts our blood vessels and raises blood pressure. Of course, hyperventilation overbreathing sometimes is necessary, and you can create certain effects by doing that. But again, I don't necessarily recommend it, especially in the type of work that we are performing with meditation. I don't know if you know this, but voluntary breathing can be overridden by involuntary breathing. That is, you're conscious of your breathing and you suddenly become stressed or upset about something, and involuntary breathing will take over. The hypothalamus and the amygdala in the brain, these react to perceived stress, and respiration rates increase because that's part of the fight-flight response. In contrast, stimulating the vagus nerve restores calm and normal breathing rhythms. And I know many of you heard the teleconference, several teleconferences where Grandmaster Julie Scott has invited us to rub our earlobes, which is one way of also stimulating the vagus nerve. By observing your own reactions, you can override the stress response, calm down, and go back to voluntary breathing. This is a remarkable and highly recommended resource about breath and breathing. It's simply called Breath, with the subtitle, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. And we see a photograph of him here participating in a breath study in 2018. And he writes about that at length. This was done at Stanford University in their Department of Head and Neck Surgery under Dr. Nayak. And you see him here exploring. James Nestor's in the chair, and his nose and throat are being explored by the doctor. So Mr. Nestor, the author of this book, had his nose plugged. It was part of the study, so he could breathe only through his mouth. And the book is extremely informative, and it's also quite funny. So I highly recommend it because it takes us through his journey in discovering more and more about the breath. And he's done this over numerous years. He's an investigative reporter. Contrary again to what you might think is true, that breathing less and more slowly actually improves our oxygen uptake. Breathing more slowly, breathing less, improves our oxygen uptake. Increasing our exhalations and breathing more slowly also has a calming effect. The ancients knew this, the Rosicrucians practiced this, many people practice this east and west as a way of deepening meditation, increasing the exhalation and breathing more slowly. Slow breathing is also associated with prayer and chanting. Nestor talks about, for instance, the chant that is familiar to many, the Om Mane Padme Hum, requires a certain amount of exhalation, a length of time where you say that slowly and you exhale. It is true that also in our order, we practice chants and vowel intonations. These are powerful for a number of reasons, some of which, of course, are associated with breathing, just breathing. Now, finally, in concluding this part on science and the body and breathing, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you can breathe like an athlete. That is me running the Niagara Half Marathon. It's a half marathon, not a full marathon. This was one that it started in, I think, Buffalo in the United States, and then came across to Canada. I ran on the Canadian side. It was a kind of loop or an out and back of 21.1 kilometers. And I'm proud to say I did that in 2018, and I ran the entire distance. You see me here with my mouth open. Hopefully I'm not breathing too heavily, but rather gently, but smiling because I know I'm having my photograph taken. And I'm in probably the last 2 kilometers or so before the finish line. So I'm hopefully increasing my pace. So what is VO2 max, and why is it linked to nose breathing and breathing like an athlete? Well, some of you will be able to relate to this. When we first take up a sport that requires some exertion, we usually breathe through our mouths. We also feel winded and fatigue easily. My first running clinic I joined when I was 52 years old, and my 60s in this photograph. But at 52, I started running, and the clinic required us to run for 2 minutes, walk for 3 minutes. And it was a hot summer evening, and I thought I would die, just that I could not even run and catch my breath for 2 minutes. But it's amazing what the body can do if you pace yourself and you work at it over time. It might surprise you to know that experienced athletes don't breathe through their mouths. They breathe through their noses, while also breathing less often. Ideally, 5.5 breaths per minute. Those young people or persons who, and not necessarily, they don't have to be young, but those who win marathons, half marathons, and professional races and events, cyclists, they are trained to breathe at a slower rate, more calmly, and through their noses. VO2 max refers to the maximum amount of oxygen the body can utilize as energy. And we are born with a certain capacity. All of us are unique individuals when it comes to our VO2 max capacity. What happens is oxygen converts to something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which helps to release carbon dioxide while also powering your cells. So it may be that some athletes, especially those who perform in short bursts, like hockey players, so when they skate hard, they are doing more rapid exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide. But VO2 max declines with age. However, at any age, you can improve your cardiorespiratory fitness by exercise. In fact, anything beyond a slight stroll is helpful. I have a mantra that I say to myself while I'm running. The more you run, the more you can run. I know that the body adapts. So let us get into the mystical aspects of breathing. Rosicrucian ontology states, the soul incarnates in the infant body at the moment of its first breath, making it a living, conscious being. Vital life force is the life essence that vitalizes the body at the moment of birth and which leaves the body at the moment of transition or death. The physical elements of the body after death return to their primary atomic state, what we call spirit energy. This is how Rosicrucians refer to the energy of electrons and the elemental particles of matter. And here's a longer quote, and it comes from a teleconference given by Grandmaster Julie Scott. A person asked the question about what is the difference between spirit energy and soul. And here's what she said. As Rosicrucians see it, spirit is the energy which acts as the basis for matter and keeps electrons, protons, and neutrons in motion. Lacking this energy, not only would the material world not exist, but we would also be incapable of perceiving it. The soul, on the other hand, corresponds to the spiritual part of our being. Throughout each incarnation, the soul uses the physical body and all of its faculties to evolve in its interactions with the physical world. This fundamental difference between spirit and soul is explained at the beginning of the Rosicrucian studies. Think of spirit, vital life force, and soul as energies vibrating at different rates. Rosicrucians speak of these octaves of energies as a cosmic keyboard of vibrations, and we often use the analogy of a piano keyboard shown here. All living things arise from the earth. However, it is essentially sunlight that powers all metabolic functions. Our physical bodies are sustained by the food we eat and water we drink and the air we breathe. These are separate. Food and water provide the negative polarity, relatively speaking, whereas the positive polarity comes from the cosmic essence contained in the air we breathe. All three aspects, spirit energy, vital life force, and soul, create a unified entity existing through a range of vibrations from lower to higher. Our resonance with the cosmic keyboard, because these are ascending octaves that repeat, and even at lower levels, we can resonate with higher energies because of the way this keyboard exists, and there's resonance with these vibrations that allows us to raise our consciousness in cosmic attunement. Breath is considered the universal symbol of life. In our teachings, we learn about the relationship between breath and universal soul. At this special time of year in celebration of the summer solstice, we recognize that the cosmic essence radiates from the source that reaches us through solar rays. We can last for several days without food, much fewer with less water. Air, however, is indispensable for life. Minutes. But even scientists agree that simply giving oxygen to a dying person isn't enough to sustain life. Cosmic essence permeates all living beings. Without its influx, no living being could exist, whether in the soil, on the earth, in the water, or in the air. Air is more than a catalyst for organic life. In ancient languages, the same word was used to designate both breath and soul, the primordial emanation of divinity. Humans are much more than just living beings. They are triune in nature and combine soul essence, spirit energy, and vital life force. Hence, all living beings have some level of conscious life. Yesterday, Julian Johnson talked about plants. We see here an insect. Do not take all living beings for granted. They are our sisters and brothers. Now, those of you who have read widely and also studied various traditions are aware of these terms, chi, prana, and also from ancient Greek, pneuma. The Chinese term, it's another kind of synonymous for prana, is chi. In other words, energy created by even simple actions, like the sounds made by someone cleaning up the kitchen dishes. Note that air is also the medium of sound vibrations. Traditional Chinese acupuncture medicine suggests that there are channels in the body that circulate qi. The most powerful technique, however, is to breathe. Breath work in Chinese is called qigong. Qi meaning breath, gong meaning work. Prana, like qi, refers to energy associated with the life force. Acupuncture is said to open channels for this energy to flow, whereas yoga awakens and distributes this energy. Eastern diets are often spicy, since traditionally hot food, and I don't mean necessarily by temperature, but spicy food is said to contain more prana. You would need to, I think, experiment with that for yourself to see if that is actually true. Eastern spiritual traditions have developed countless methods for breath work to consciously manipulate energy in the body. There was a person in the 1970s who was tested in a university through experiments. Swami Rama was his name, and he could change his bodily temperature by several degrees simply by using certain breathing techniques. He could make his heartbeat seem to stop. What it was doing actually was beating at an incredibly rapid rate. He did all of this through breathing techniques. In the 1970s, some of you would be familiar with the machine, the biofeedback device, where people could actually quite literally, by just thinking about it and watching and making the dial move on the biofeedback machine, raise and lower their blood pressure. There are certain functions that are considered automatic or autonomic that we can control consciously. Pneuma is synonymous with ruah in Hebrew, eru in Arabic, and spiritus in Latin, meaning both breath and soul. And you know that in Latin, spiritus sanctus is the Holy Spirit, and that is the idea of the divine breath that infuses matter and makes us into living beings. The mystical quality attributed to air was the term pneuma in ancient Greece. The divine essence enters at the first breath, as we said in Rosicrucian ontology, and a soul personality becomes a conscious being. Now, this is a little bit more of the scientific explanation that should surprise you. A developing fetus, and many of you already know this, obtains its life from the mother's body through exchange with her blood and her breath through the placenta. A fetus in the womb does not breathe. At the moment of the first breath, at birth, observable changes take place. For example, the polarity of the pericardial fluid around the heart changes. There's the closing of the foramen ovale. If I'm saying that right. That's the connection between the fetal heart and the mother's circulatory system. The lungs expand when they've been closed before. At the first breath, infants' lungs expand and blood circulation changes. I know at the birth of my own daughter, when she was born, and I was consciously observing the birth. She was blue. And when she took her first inhalation, she became vitalized with breath, and her color immediately changed to pink. It was one of the most miraculous experiences I've ever had. Now, conscious breathing, of course, we're breathing consciously when we choose to sing, when we formulate our thoughts into words, when we perform vowel intonations. Very early in our studies, we offer students a chart of specific vocal intonations or chants. You can use these while also concentrating on certain colors and energy centers in the body. This chart is given to us at the very beginning of our studies. Any kind of vocalization requires us to control our breathing consciously. As you progress in the studies, you gain some mastery over your own conscious breathing processes to achieve radiant health and overall better performance in daily life. Specific breathing exercises have many uses, and here's just one of them as taught in the monographs. This was the cover of the Rosicrucian Forum in April 1982. And those of you who have access to our studies, go to the members portal and you can access the forum and find this particular one from 1982 and look up this very important exercise for charging the water, especially if you've already gone through the monographs and you want to refresh yourself about that exercise and some of its benefits. With Rosicrucian healing and the art of conscious breathing, we purposely and quite often hold our breath. In our studies, students are instructed in two fundamental healing methods that employ additional breath work: absent healing or metaphysical aid. We say an opening and closing invocation when we perform metaphysical aid. We also often use the vowel sound Om. In contact healing, there's specific methods where we hold the breath. As a reminder, though, the second, like the first, should never be applied for financial gain, but only to assist others in need. Further, holding on full creates a positive polarity in the body, while holding on empty creates a negative polarity. Both are useful in certain treatments, and these are taught in detail in the 6th degree of our monographs. In meditation, we use specific breathing techniques. It is helpful if you breathe through your nose and extend your exhalations through the nose. With each exhalation, take a deeper seat within yourself. Practice this in just a moment. The Rosicrucian technique is very simple. Some of you know it by another name. Simply become aware of your breathing. Observe the breath. Now called mindfulness, one simply observes the breath at the nostrils and any thoughts that arise without following them. Be in the moment without judgment. To repeat a mantra or chant focuses the breath and deepens relaxation until you can let go and enter a space between breaths, between sounds, between thoughts. Allow this space, called mystical silence, to expand. Being aware of your breath while circulating cosmic essence, chi or prana, if you will, at the heart center deepens meditation. There's something in our tradition through Johannes Kelpius called the prayer of the heart, and Stephen Armstrong writes about it in the Rosicrucian Digest dedicated to Martinism. And it's in the resources, and Karen will post those now as a PDF, which you can download to your computer or your device and look at these later. It's an extensive list of resources, and I invite Karen to in the chat now. So doing that, circulating that energy of the vital life force, of cosmic essence at the heart center, also is a form of meditation. The ultimate form of Rosicrucian meditation is to rise to the level of the celestial sanctum. And in the booklet, Liber 777, we are invited to assume that this is the highest plane of consciousness you can conceive within yourself. We are going to practice this exercise in just a moment, but I want to go over the basics. It's one of the very first experiments that Rosicrucian students learn to perform, and it's called the overall exercise. When I first tried this exercise as a neophyte, as a very new student, many years ago, I was studying university. I was around the age of 20, and I tried this exercise, and it was remarkable. I said to myself, wow, this really works. What we do is we focus the center of consciousness. And in the original exercise, as it was taught to me, we focus our center of consciousness where we usually think about it, at the center of the head, and we move it to our feet while taking positive deep breaths. That means holding on full and exhaling slowly as we focus on various parts of the body, going from the feet up the legs, through the torso, up the arms to the shoulders, up the spine, into the face, the head, etc. We use visualization, and we maintain our focus on the vitality of consciousness moving to each part of our body. This ancient technique and others have been used by Rosicrucian alchemists in their pursuit of the fifth element, called the cosmic quintessence, or also known as the philosopher's stone. So in this illustration, we see Basil Valentine's Azoth of the philosophers. The actual illustration, the first time that it was printed was in 1659, but it's really based on Valentine's description from 1629. And there is a wonderful paper in volume 10 of the Rosicrucian Journal, Searching for the Cosmic Quintessence, How Alchemists Meditated in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, or Renaissance. And you can check that out again at www.rosicrucianjournal.org. Without the plus sign. Finally, I promised that we would talk about something called, in esoteric texts, the universal breath. The cycle of the universal breath, the inhalation and the exhalation, can be symbolized by the yin and yang of various wisdom traditions like Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, including Rosicrucianism. Some esoteric texts state that a universal breath exists between divinity and all living beings on earth. This universal breath allows the soul personality to incarnate in the body of each person at the moment of birth and to depart the body at the time of death or transition. Thus, from incarnation to incarnation, the human soul could be said to travel between the human and the divine by means of a continuous series of inhalations and exhalations. So in summary, all living things, like all the cells in our bodies, are enlivened by a universal intelligence, a cosmic essence. Our body works as a harmoniously functioning system that automatically seeks homeostasis, or balance, in other words. We are a manifestation of three aspects of being: spirit energy, vital life force, and soul essence. As a living soul, we can breathe more slowly, calmly, and consciously, while directing the energy produced by our bodies physically and psychically. The Rosicrucian order teaches its students to apply natural laws for their own and humanity's improvement. So let us now take a moment, if you will, to sit comfortably with your feet flat on the floor, your hands palms down in your lap, your spine erect, and close your eyes. Exhale all the sterile air from your lungs via your nose. Inhale slowly. Holding your breath for a few beats. Exhaling again slowly through the nose. Now do this a few more times consciously. And as you lengthen each exhalation, take a deeper seat within yourself. Visualize the center of consciousness at the center of your head. Visualize it as a small ball of white light. Now consciously inhaling and holding your breath for a few beats, take the light that is you, yourself, and place it in your toes. See this light as it invigorates your toes as you exhale slowly. Inhaling again and holding. Take that light in your toes across the soles of your feet, up your ankles. And as you exhale, move this light further up your shins, your calves, to the knees. Try to time your breathing with each part of the body. We're going to do this relatively quickly because it's getting late. So from your toes to your feet and your ankles, up your legs to your knees, and up through the thighs. And with each body part, inhaling through the nose and holding for a few beats. And as you exhale slowly, taking that light even further up through the buttocks, through the torso, enlivening each cell and organ in your body, the intestines, to the solar plexus, the stomach, the liver, the heart, the lungs. Concentrate your focus on your lungs as you inhale slowly. Hold for a few beats and exhale slowly. See the light invigorating from your toes through your feet, traveling up your legs, through your thighs, up through the torso, to the heart center, down your shoulders, through the arms and into your hands. As you take a deep breath and hold it, feel that tingling sensation through your feet, up your legs, through the torso, down your arms, into your hands. Now take that light of consciousness that is you from the base of your spine, up the spine. Feel each vertebra as you rise higher and higher to the base of your neck, through your throat. Feel your jaw, your tongue, your teeth in their sockets, your gums, your lips, the skin of your face, your ears, your eyes, your hair. And now, finally, it's a deep breath through your nose, holding it on full for a few beats. Take this light just above your head. Hold it there, and then slowly exhale. As you look down upon yourself, your entire being, every cell glowing with light. Now enter that space and attune for a moment with the divine. It is both within each cell of your body and all around you. So mote it be. Brothers and sorors, thank you so much again for being here this evening. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I wish you all very pleasant good evening. Thank you.